Every prayer you've sent up since the church hurt you, God heard it. Every single one. The problem was never the signal, it was always the receiver. There is a kind of wound that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like doubt, exactly. It doesn't feel like anger, though the anger was there, clean and righteous in the beginning. This wound feels like static. Like trying to tune into a frequency you once heard so clearly, and now all you get is white noise. You read the same verses that used to break you open. You sit in worship and watch people around you weep, and you wonder what is wrong with you, why you can't feel God's love the way you once did. You feel the absence of feeling, and somewhere in the quietest part of you, a conclusion has started to form, that the silence means something about God's disposition toward you personally. That conclusion is wrong, and it's costing you everything. Here's the question that changes the entire picture. What if you've been treating a problem of signal when the actual problem is the receiver? What if everything you've done since the wound, the longer prayers, the worship nights, the desperate attempts to feel something again, has been like someone with a bent antenna climbing higher and higher to get better reception, when the antenna itself is what needs repair? That distinction matters enormously, because you don't fix a bent antenna by trying harder to feel the signal. You fix it by changing your posture toward the source. In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you exactly what was damaged, the 3 signs that confirm it, and 2 specific practices, drawn from one of the most psychologically honest passages in all of Scripture, that begin to restore what betrayal broke. Stay with me. Most people who have been wounded by the church carry what I'd call a private theology of abandonment. They'd never say it out loud. But the subtext of their spiritual life has quietly shifted. He was there when they used his name to wound me. He knew what was happening inside that building, and he said nothing. That silence, interpreted as divine indifference, doesn't just hurt once. It becomes the invisible foundation that everything after is built on. Every unanswered prayer now confirms it. Every dry worship service adds another piece of evidence. Every Bible verse that used to land now slides off the surface of a heart that has learned, at a cellular level, to protect itself from being opened again. And here's what no one tells you: that isn't a faith problem. That is a biological response to betrayal. The capacity to receive love, specifically from a source previously associated with pain, gets damaged by the wound. Not destroyed, damaged, and damaged things can be repaired. The first sign your receiver is bent rather than God being absent. Scripture still makes sense to your mind, but it no longer reaches your heart. You can explain it, defend it, teach it to someone else. But when you sit with it quietly in the place where it once felt like fire, there's nothing there. This is exactly what attachment psychology would predict. When betrayal comes from a trusted source, the brain begins rerouting emotional responses. It doesn't erase the intellectual content. It disconnects the emotional channel. The information stays. The experience disappears. And when the place the betrayal happened was a place of worship, when the wound came wrapped in scripture, in prayer, in the name of God, the rerouting happens in the exact architecture of your soul that was designed to receive his love. That's not a coincidence. That's the specific cruelty of church hurt. The second sign: you've replaced intimacy with God with information about God. You know more theology now than you did before the wound. That's not an accident. Knowledge feels safe. Theology can be managed from a distance, but intimacy requires exactly what the wound taught your nervous system to never do again. It requires opening. Every time you get close to genuine vulnerability before God, something inside you shuts down. A defense activates. You tell yourself you're being discerning, guarded, spiritually mature. But underneath that language, something is hiding, and it has been hiding since the day someone who was supposed to represent God used that position to break you. The third sign, the quietest one and the most devastating: you've started to believe that spiritual intensity is the solution. That if you worship harder, fast longer, pray more fervently, you'll eventually break through whatever wall has formed between you and God, but you never do. And every failed attempt becomes another piece of evidence for the private theology, that his silence is personal, that it means something specific about you. Here is the truth that attachment psychology and scriptural theology arrive at from 2 completely different directions. Perfect love casts out fear. which means fear, the direct output of betrayal and rejection, actively blocks the reception of love. These aren't two separate problems. They describe the same broken circuit from different angles. The signal hasn't changed. The receiver is reading it through a layer of scar tissue. 3,000 years ago, a man sat in a cave on a mountain. His name was Elijah, and what happened to him may be the most overlooked case study in receiver damage in all of Scripture. The day before, he had watched fire fall from heaven, God's power made undeniable, public, overwhelming. And then, the very next morning, he ran, he hid, he asked to die. He told God he was the only faithful one left, as if the fire from the day before had somehow proved nothing, reached nowhere inside him. The miracle had been enormous. The experience of being loved had not followed. Notice what God chose not to do. He didn't send another fire. He didn't repeat the miracle and ask Elijah why it still wasn't enough. He sent a whisper because God already understood what Elijah hadn't yet. The problem was never the volume of the signal. The problem was the posture of the receiver. But Elijah had to come to the mouth of the cave before the whisper could reach him. The cave after a church hurt doesn't feel like retreat. It feels like wisdom. It feels like finally protecting yourself. And in the beginning, the cave is merciful. God doesn't rebuke Elijah for being in it. He meets him there with food, with water, with rest. He lets him be exhausted. He doesn't demand performance, but the cave is not designed to be a permanent residence. Because inside the cave, there is no whisper. There is only the echo of your own pain playing on loop, and the silence you've learned to interpret as confirmation of everything you fear. The postures that begin to heal a damaged receiver cannot be maintained inside the cave. They require coming closer to the source. Not to the institution, not to the people who hurt you. You don't owe them access, but to God Himself, which is precisely what the wound has made feel most dangerous. So here is the hard thing, the thing that might cost something to hear. The problem isn't that God has been absent. The problem is that you've been receiving Him through the filter of betrayal, and that filter reads every incoming transmission through the same lens. This is how it started last time. And so the soul flinches before it can open. And the flinch gets filed as further evidence of His silence. But the ache you still carry, even inside the numbness, is itself proof that the receiver is not destroyed. You don't grieve the loss of a frequency you never received. There are two practices from 1 Kings 19 that begin to restore what betrayal damaged. Neither one requires you to feel anything first. The first is posture before feeling. You come to the mouth of the cave, you don't have to leave it yet, but you stop going deeper in. In practical terms, you return to one small spiritual practice that carries no performance pressure. Not a church service, not a prayer list, something quiet, something private, reading one verse slowly, sitting in 3 minutes of silence with no agenda, no expectation, no target feeling. Elijah came to the mouth of the cave before he heard the whisper. The posture came before the experience, not after it. You don't wait to feel ready, you position yourself and trust the signal to reach you. The second practice is harder. You bring the wound itself to God, not to your theology about God, to God, not asking for an explanation, not demanding justice, just placing it there and saying, "This happened in your house. I need you to meet me in it." Most healing frameworks for church hurt teach you to separate God from the people who hurt you. That separation is theologically correct, but it's psychologically incomplete because your nervous system doesn't make that distinction automatically. What wires together fires together. The wound and the source became associated. The only way to deassociate them is to bring the wound to the source himself and let him respond. Elijah didn't receive a lecture in that cave. He received bread, water, and one quiet question: "What are you doing here?" A damaged receiver is not a broken faith. It is evidence that something real was there to damage in the first place. The path back is not feeling harder. It is changing your posture slowly, without pressure, without a deadline, toward the one who never stopped broadcasting. I want to leave you with a question, not an assignment. If the problem was never His absence, if He has been sending love in your direction this entire time, what would it mean, starting today, to treat this as a receiver problem rather than a signal problem? Because those two diagnoses lead to entirely different responses. And only one of them can actually begin the repair. Take your time with that. God is not watching a clock.